Today on Know the Truth with Philip de Courcy.
The demands of Christianity were incompatible with partial commitment or casual engagement. In the Gospels, we see the Lord's call required clear-headed, full-throated, wholehearted, two-footed allegiance to Him, His kingdom, and that which He set out to do. To borrow the words of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, when Jesus bid a man come, He bid him come to die.
Sacrifice seems costly, but the rewards of true discipleship are immeasurable. Today on Know the Truth, Philip de Courcy explains why following Christ demands everything, yet ironically leads to gaining far more than we lose. We're learning how to view our relationships, ambitions, and possessions through the lens of Christ's lordship. It's the conclusion of a message titled Counting the Cost. If you missed part 1 or 2 of this message, catch up at ktt.org. Let's join Pastor Philip for today's lesson now.
Jesus wanted those who would follow Him to count the cost and make the commitment. The demands of Christianity were incompatible with partial commitment or casual engagement. So we'll come to Luke 14, 25 to 35, and we'll see there's no fine print. It's nailed to the front door, because Jesus, in a plain and an unvarnished manner, spells out the demands of discipleship. You'll notice that you don't want to carry the demands of discipleship. Well, be careful, brother. A Christianity that costs you nothing is worth nothing, may not be Christianity. Let's get down to the passage. And Jesus wants us to count the cost as disciples regarding family, freedom, and finances. Number 1, count the cost regarding family. Verse 25 to 26. Especially 26. If anyone comes after me and does not, this takes your breath away, and at least initially until you better understand it, hate his father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters. That's striking stuff. That's not what we're expecting from the lips of the Lord Jesus. I thought He was all about love. How can He call us to hate our families? Straight out the gate, as He tries to thin the herd, to determine true disciples, He goes for the jugular. It's jarring. The point is Jesus is making is this: our love for Him ought to be so out there, so large, so limitless, that compared to any other relationship, it will seem like we don't like the other person, we hate the other person, we dismiss the other person. To be a disciple of Jesus means that every other relationship is subordinate to our relationship with Him and takes the back seat. We'll always love, or we always should love, those we love less than the one who has loved us with an everlasting love. Francis Schaeffer, a generation ago, he's now with the Lord, but he was a helpful brother and wrote about the culture and the church's role within the culture. But when he got saved and he came out of a non-religious family, and his father became aware that his son wanted to go to college and train for the ministry, and he violently, vehemently opposed it. And it put a tension between him and his father. In fact, one day his father met him at the door with these words: "I don't want a son who's a minister." The tension continued. Schaeffer got alone with God and realized, Lord, help me. And the Lord reinforced this idea. You know what? If you're my disciple, you're going to follow me. I'm priority. And Schaeffer went and told his dad, I got to go. And again, initially there was an angry outburst. The father slammed the door in his son's face and disappeared for a while. Schaeffer followed God's calling in his life. But shortly after that, in God's kindness, the father's icy response began to melt, and even over time, he began to send his son some money when he was being trained for the ministry, and ultimately got saved himself. But what I love about that story, is that Schaeffer realized the choice he had to make, and the allegiance to Jesus needed to be priority. Number 2, cost regarding freedom. Cost regarding family, cost regarding freedom. The second mark is our willingness to suffer any hardship for Christ. Look at verse 26 to 27. In fact, it's verse 27. Whoever does not bear his cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now, the image of a cross in the mind of the Jew or the Gentile spelled one thing: death. Because that's what it was. It was an instrument of execution. It was an instrument of death. It brought thoughts of horror and terror to the human mind because it was a slow, excruciating, painful, torturous death. And so Jesus takes that analogy and he says, hey, my disciples are cross bearers. If someone was seen carrying a horizontal Roman cross, people knew they were fodder for Roman execution. Their life was about to end, their plans were about to be buried, their desires were about to die, and their concerns were no one's concern. Read the story of George Mueller, a full life, magnificent life. I'd love to detail the details, but I'm going to leave it for the sake of time. But he was asked towards the end of his life what was the reason for his success, or his effectiveness would be a better word. And he said this: there was a day when I died, utterly died to George Mueller, his opinions, preferences, tastes, and will. Died to the world, its approval or censorship. Died to the approval or blame even of my brethren or friends. And since then, I have studied only to show myself approved of God. There was a day he died, and the day he died and surrendered his life to Jesus defined every other day in which he was willing to die some more. In his book, All In, Pastor Batterson says that a century ago, a band of brave souls known as one-way missionaries headed to the mission field. Have you ever heard about these guys? I think there was some women involved too. One-way missionaries. They purchased single tickets to the mission field. They didn't buy a return ticket. They didn't pack their stuff in suitcases. They packed their stuff in coffins, because they weren't coming back. They had already decided to follow Jesus. No turning back. And they sailed all across the world, said goodbye to comfort and friends and everything they knew, with a sense that they'd never return. One of those was a man by the name of A.W. Milne. He set sail for the New Hebrides in the South Pacific, knowing full well that the headhunters and cannibals that lived there had murdered every Christian that went. It was a do-or-die mission, but he didn't fear that. Why? He didn't fear them killing him. Why? Because he had already died before he got there. And in fact, they didn't kill him, and God used him in a magnificent way. He lived there for 35 years, and when he died, an epitaph was erected, a tombstone, and on the tombstone were written these words by the natives: when he came, there was no light. When he left, there was no darkness. Powerful. I feel pitiful, do you not? All my supposed sacrifices seem like nothing. The one-way missionaries, the George Muellers, let's aspire to that kind of life, that kind of perspective. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the next verses because they're the two parables, and they're kind of self-explanatory. They're very simple, but like every good sermon, Jesus illustrates his point. So he's in the middle of a sermon here, and he's, hey, you can't be my disciple unless my relationship with you trumps every other relationship. You can't be my disciple unless you're willing to die literally or to self each and every day. And then he illustrates it with two parables, right? And each parable makes the same point. If you're going to become my disciple, you need to count the cost. And he tells the story of a man that's going to build a building. He says, look, if you're a smart builder, you're going to sit down and do the cost. You're going to pencil the cost out. Because, we've all walked down streets where buildings have been left unfinished, you know, and you go, what idiot started that and never finished it? And that's kind of Jesus' point. You don't want people mocking you where you got half the house built. You built the first floor, but not the second floor. You built the foundation, but not the first floor. You gotta count the cost. You know, I've reminded myself in the middle of our own building project, as costs have moved and risen and little things happen you weren't expecting. We're still on top of it, and our Mark and the team have done a phenomenal job on that. But I keep reminding myself, and I joke with the elders, that Warren Wiersbe made a statement about church buildings. He says there's three things that's true about them. Number one, they'll take longer than you expected, cost more than you budgeted, and three, they'll end up looking nothing like you started out with. We're going to try and minimize all of that at Kindred, but that's just the reality. And so you sit down and you count the costs. One of my dear friends who's now with the Lord, died young, was an elder with me in a former church. His job was an estimator. I wouldn't want that job. This guy estimated a building down to bolts and washers. By their thousands, lumber and metal and framing and drywall and paint and bolts and nuts and washers, so that his boss had a good idea of what he could go in and bid on. He was an estimator, and Jesus says, hey, you need to be an estimator. Before you step in my direction, have you counted the cost? And then the other one's war, I've reminded myself and others just in counseling situations, never start a fight you can't win. It's just not worth it. I've also made statements like, don't start a fight you can't win, or don't start a fight that even if you do win, it wouldn't be worth it. Old Van Savner said anybody can beat a skunk. It's just not worth it. And so you got to sit down and think these things out. And Jesus says, hey, if you're a builder, you'd count the cost. If you were a general or a king, you'd count the cost. Do I have the men? Is it the right time of the year to fight? Do I have the armaments? That's the point. Let's get down to our last thought. The third mark of discipleship is that we surrender ownership of all of our possessions to Jesus, the master of all things. That's verse 33. So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. Counting the cost has us counting everything we have as his. Relationships, ambitions, and now possessions. They all come under his lordship. Okay, that would be, to go back to the Old Testament to make my point, that would be Proverbs 3, wouldn't it? 9 and 10, where Jesus said, or the Word of God says, honor the Lord with your possessions and with your first fruits of your increase. So your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will overflow with new wine. Can I remind you of Psalm 24, verse 1? What does it say? The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And before we're done in our series on prophecy, we're going to look at the millennial kingdom. He's going to come back and take what's his that's being mismanaged by us. You see what Jesus is saying here? That he's Lord over relationships, ambitions, possessions. And the point he's making is it's not a question of what we give to the Lord. It's always a question of what we keep of the Lord's for ourselves. Because it's all his. It's his. And we're simply stewards of his generosity. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. The life, the breath you have was his to give. The smarts that you have that makes you as effective as you are was his gift. The providence that allows you to prosper, the land you live in with all of its freedoms and economy, it's all his in terms of gifts. Now, this is not Jesus, again, back to my introduction, telling us how we can purchase salvation. Isaiah 55, 1-2 says, those who have no money, come, it's free. This isn't a call to a vow of poverty. I don't see that in the Bible. 1 Timothy 5, verse 8 tells every Christian man you need to provide for your family. Get a job, make some money, take care of your family. In fact, 1 Timothy 6:17, God has given us all things to enjoy. So we're not talking about the purchase of salvation, and we're not talking about a vow to poverty, but what we are being confronted with and what Jesus is addressing us with is, I want you to manage what I have given you under my lordship. That means that you can't spend your money divorced from theology. You can't spend your money without prayerful reflection. When's the last time you and I sat down and looked at our budget and made sure that it's in proportion, that we're ticking the boxes, we're taking care of our family, we're giving tithes and offerings to the Lord's work, we're being generous to those in need, we're helping the poor, we're setting aside some money for emergencies and a rainy day. All of those are biblical things. And that's what we ought to be doing. We ought to be managing our money with a kingdom perspective. Are we tithing our income to the church at least? Are we supporting God's servants, especially those who labor in the word and doctrine? Are some of us willing, under the prompting of the Spirit and the need of the perishing millions, to sell up and go to the mission field? Are we setting out to retire modestly for the sake of the kingdom? Are we limiting our luxuries and our purchases for the sake of the kingdom? Well, we could buy that, but why should we buy that when there's a need here and a need there and a need here? It's a mindset. Can you look recently to acts of hospitality and works of charity? I think that's all under this. If I don't have control of all that you have, you're not my disciple. Are we willing to get fired for the sake of the gospel? Appreciated our brother David last month talking about the working environment of modern executive America. But he's already drawn a line in his mind that he would be willing to lose his job if necessary for the sake of the gospel. He's already penciled that out because that's where we might be in today's world where politics and sexual morality are invading the workplace. Are we willing to lose our pension, our jobs for the sake of the gospel? I mentioned the word pension because I worked with a dear man of God back in Ohio by the name of Pastor V, as he was lovingly known to us, Pastor Amelia. I was part of a body of churches for a while called the GARBC, General Association of Regular Baptists. They came out of the Northern Baptist Association. So you've heard of the SBC. This was the kind of Northern Baptist Association or the convention, and it had gone liberal. It had betrayed the gospel. It had questioned the Bible. And men had fought within and realized the fight was done. The enemy had won. And out of a call to separation and to not have fellowship with darkness, they separated and they created their own body of churches called the GARBC. In those early days, those men left pensions. Pastor Amelia was one of them. When they struck out to build a body of churches true to the gospel, they left everything behind and they charged forward with nothing materially speaking. In fact, Pastor Amelia told us that he was paid in chickens and eggs. He never had he never got money given to him. He had a little home loaned to him and he was paid in chickens and eggs. That's how he survived for those first years as those churches get on their feet. You imagine that story around a table of about 20 pastors, some of them young. It was great. Challenged us about our belly aching. And we don't have this and we don't have that. Here we are enjoying the freedoms and the blessings of a good church that knows the gospel, but man paid a price. I hope you're willing to think that through and pray that through. But as we close, I want to turn, not that any of this hasn't been positive, but I want to remind you that while you're counting the hefty cost, have you counted the cost on family, freedom, finances? While you're counting that hefty cost of following Jesus, remember to figure in the kingdom paradox that when we're losing, we're gaining. When we're losing, we're gaining. Remember, God's kingdom's an upside-down kingdom, a back-to-front kingdom. The humble get exalted, and those who lose gain. Let's count the cost, but put a value on what we get in return for counting the cost. Because there are wonderful promises that come with this call to cost. We gain Christ in all of his beauty, right? Matthew 13, 25 to 46, and Philippians 3, where Jesus said, if you lose your life, you'll find it. And if you'll buy the field at a cost, you'll find the great pearl of great price. Paul said, I count all things but loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord. What I've lost is nothing to what I've gained. He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep for that which he cannot lose. And then you've got you'll gain life in all of its fullness. I kind of quoted that, Matthew 10:39, Matthew 16:24-26. If you lose your life, you'll find it. We gain eternal reward. Matthew 10:28-31. There was a day when Peter was feeling a little sorry for himself. Well, do you realize my fishing business is, being hurt. I left the nets. I left my livelihood. I don't see my wife as much on the road. And Jesus said, hold on a minute. What have you lost? Okay. On the calculator. What if I doubled that in terms of reward? Or maybe quadruple it or triple it, or I'll give you 100-fold for what you're doing. Remember what we said a few weeks ago in one of the sermons? We talk about sacrifice, but is it a sacrifice? When we breathe in immortality someday and stand on the shores of God's eternal kingdom, will it seem like a sacrifice? No. David Livingstone said, for my part, I have never ceased to rejoice that God has appointed me to such an office. People talk of the sacrifice I've made in spending my life in Africa, and he did, humanly speaking, lost an arm when a lion attacked him. He was often sick with fever and virus. He buried his wife in Africa. Is that a sacrifice which brings its own blessed reward in healthy activity, the consciousness of doing good, peace of mind, the bright hope of a glorious destiny hereafter? Away with the word in such a view and with such a thought. I emphatically made no sacrifice. Say rather it is a privilege. Anxiety, sickness, suffering, danger now and then with the foregoing of common conveniences and charities in life may make us pause and cause the spirit to waver and the soul to sink, but let this only be for a moment. All these are nothing when compared with the glory that shall be revealed in us and for us. I never made a sacrifice. So my friend, when you have to pay in the realm of relationships, when you have to pay in the realm of self-ambition and self-preservation, when you have to pay in the realm of finances, remember, it's not a sacrifice. Given who he is, given what he promises, given what one day we will enjoy.
You're listening to the teaching of Pastor Philip de Courcy here on Know the Truth, the last part of a message he titled Counting the Cost. To replay the full message, visit ktt.org. Today's message was from our famous short story series, a study that examines Jesus' parables and the timeless truths they reveal for our lives today. It's our hope that these messages help you gain a deeper understanding of Christ's teachings and apply them to your everyday life. So this month, we're offering a resource that will aid you in doing so. It's called The Parables, Understanding What Jesus Meant by Gary Inrig. This exploration of the parables will not only help you see yourself in a new light, but also provide a window into the heart and mind of God himself. You can request a copy of the parables by giving a gift of any amount. Call 888-644-8811 or give online at ktt.org. Philip?
If after hearing today's message, you're at a crossroads about following Christ, I want you to know that Know the Truth is here for you. Whether you're burdened about your sin and your debt before a holy God, if you're ready to take the step to trust in the Lord Jesus Christ, we're here to pray with you, provide guidance, and get you set up with some great resources. If you're not ready, we'd still love to talk with you and answer any questions you might have about the Christian faith. Wayne, will you tell our listeners how to get in touch?
Yes, of course. You can call us at 888-644-8811 or send an email to info@ktt.org. And then to stay connected with Know the Truth, head over to our website, ktt.org. There we have an abundance of great resources for you to help you grow in your relationship with Christ and your daily walk of faith. Well, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Join us tomorrow for another insightful lesson on the parables of Jesus. That's Wednesday on Know the Truth. Today's program was produced and sponsored by Know the Truth Incorporated. Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free."